Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. We get a lot of requests to take a look at training programs and different medical specialties, and today we're going to be diving into one that might not be super familiar to a lot of folks, but it's definitely fascinating: medical biochemistry training, specifically in Turkey.
Oh, it's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were kind enough to share this core curriculum document with us from the Turkish Medical Specialization Board, which everybody calls 2KMUS.
Yeah, 2KMUS, yeah.
And it's it really lays out everything that goes into making these specialists, not just, the hard science, but kind of a whole package.
Yeah, it's really impressive how thorough they are.
Mm.
It's not just about being a lab whiz. They really go deep on what it takes to be like a well-rounded medical biochemist
Mm.
and how that connects to actually taking care of patients.
Yeah. I mean, right off the bat, they define medical biochemistry as, and I'm quoting here, a laboratory science and medical laboratory specialties specific to medicine and clinic. So to me, that's like right there, that's highlighting that bridge between what's happening in the lab and what's happening, with the patient at the bedside.
Yeah, and that bridge is becoming even more important these days. The document talks about how the whole field has shifted. It's not just manual lab work and number crunching anymore. Technology is a huge part of it now. But that means being able to interpret the data from those machines and actually use it to benefit the patient is, well, it's critical.
I guess it's kind of like, you could have the most powerful telescope in the world, but if you don't know what you're looking at in the night sky, it's not going to do you much good. It's like the technology is amazing, but it's the human expertise that really makes it powerful, right?
That's a great analogy. And speaking of expertise, this document makes it clear that it's not just about technical skills. They want to train specialists who can, really think critically, work effectively with others. They basically want them to be like scientific detectives, not just lab technicians.
Yeah, that emphasis on critical thinking and collaboration really stood out to me too. Because, I mean, it's not just about knowing how to run the tests, right? It's about being a consultant, being able to do research, communicate your finding. A lot of things I wouldn't necessarily have thought about for, someone working in a lab.
It's a much broader view of the profession, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And they don't shy away from the ethical side of things either, like lifelong learning, ethical conduct, being an advocate for your patients. That's all baked into their definition of what it means to be a medical biochemist.
So how does all of this, how does this vision actually translate into, the nitty-gritty of training?
Well, the document outlines a 4-year program divided into 2 stages. The first 2 years are like the foundation,
Yeah.
build that solid base in the principles and techniques of medical biochemistry. But then years 3 and 4, that's when things shift more towards specialization and research. But here's the thing that really caught my eye. They have students choose their thesis topic in year 220.
Yeah. That early focus on research is really interesting. I mean, it shows they want students to have that scientific mindset from the very beginning, right? It's not just about absorbing information. It's about figuring out what areas you're passionate about and learning how to really dig deep and investigate.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, okay, you got the basics down. Now what questions are keeping you up at night? What mysteries do you want to solve?
Exactly. And to get ready for that, they have these mandatory rotations through a bunch of different medical departments, like internal medicine, pediatrics. They even have medical microbiology in there. I have to admit, I was a little puzzled by that at first. It's like, wait a minute, why would a biochemist need to know about that?
Well, think about it. Analyzing a blood sample for a child, it's different than analyzing it for an adult.
Hmm.
You got to understand the specifics of how their bodies work,
Hmm.
right? Same with knowing about microbes and infections. It helps you understand how those things affect the body's biochemistry. It's all connected.
Okay, so get ready for this. This is the part where I did a total double take. This document, it has this massive list of basic competencies for a medical biochemist, and some of them, well, they are not what you'd expect. Like we're talking manager, team member, even health advocate.
It sounds surprising, but when you think about the bigger picture, it makes sense. Medical biochemists aren't just working solo in a lab anymore. They're often leading teams, working side by side with doctors and other healthcare folks. And they need to be able to advocate for the best possible care for their patients. So those so-called soft skills are just as important as their scientific knowledge these days.
Yeah, it's like they're saying being brilliant in the lab, that's great, but you also got to be a leader, a communicator, a collaborator. That's a pretty well-rounded picture of what it takes to really excel in this field, right?
Absolutely.
Uh,
And they even have this visual they call the competency triangle, which has these 7 key areas. And the interesting thing is the service provider area, which is all about using their knowledge to actually care for patients. That sits right at the top, supported by all the other 6.
so it's like you got to build a strong foundation of all these other skills and knowledge before you can really be effective at that top level taking care of patients.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, think of a world-class violinist. They have incredible technical skills, right?
Mm.
But if they don't have musicality, if they can't work with the orchestra, if they don't understand the composer's intentions, well, it's not going to be a very moving performance. It's the same for a medical biochemist.
Okay, so let's zoom in on that service provider piece of the puzzle. The document actually gets very specific about what they call clinical and interventional competencies. And there are some really interesting ones listed. Like, for example, this one caught my eye, nutritional and related diseases. What's that all about?
Oh, that's a really hot area right now. Medical biochemistry is playing a bigger and bigger role in personalized nutrition, like understanding how our genes and our individual metabolism affect how we respond to different foods, and then using that knowledge to, manage and prevent diseases.
Interesting. Prenatal screening tests also jumped out at me. I think people don't always make the connection between those tests, which are, so important in the biochemistry behind them.
It's amazing what you can learn by analyzing a pregnant woman's blood. Those biochemical markers can tell you so much about the health of the developing baby, which lets doctors catch potential problems early on.
Huh. And then there's drug, toxic substance, alcohol, and substance dependence. That's got to be tied to those growing fields of like toxicology and personalized medicine, right?
Absolutely. Understanding how our bodies process drugs and toxins, that's key to developing safe and effective treatments that are tailored to each individual. Medical biochemistry is right at the forefront of that kind of research, paving the way for more targeted therapies.
It's incredible how broad the impact of medical biochemistry really is. And what's interesting to me is that the document doesn't just list these competencies, it actually outlines specific proficiency levels for each one, from level 1 to level 4. So you can really see how trainees are expected to progress from, novice to expert over those 4 years.
Yeah, that structured approach is super important.
Yeah.
Especially in a field this complex, it makes sure trainees are developing their skills step by step and that they have a solid foundation before they move on to more advanced stuff.
And it doesn't stop there. They also talk about all the different ways that trainees are expected to learn. So you got your traditional lectures, of course, but also hands-on lab work, research projects, even teaching others.
They even talk about the importance of what they call independent and exploratory learning.
Yeah.
So it's not just about checking off boxes in a syllabus, it's about nurturing that curiosity and that passion for discovery. That's what fuels real expertise.
I think that's a really good point to pause for a second and kind of take stock of what we've covered so far. It's been a lot. I mean, we've seen how this training program in Turkey, it goes way beyond just the technical stuff, right? It's about leadership, communication, ethics, and there's that strong focus on research from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's a very thorough and holistic approach.
Yeah.
What stood out to you the most so far? What are your initial impressions of this model?
Honestly, I'm really impressed by how much they emphasize creating well-rounded specialists, people who are ready to not only do great work in the lab, but also, contribute to the bigger picture of healthcare.
I agree. It's a really forward-thinking approach. They clearly recognize that the role of the medical biochemist is changing in the 21st century. But there's still so much more to uncover.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to get into some of the more fascinating stuff from this document. Like, for instance, what kind of impact could emerging technologies like nanotechnology have on the field of medical biochemistry? So stick with us.
So before we went to, before the break there, we were just starting to talk about nanotechnology and what kind of impact it might have on, medical biochemistry as a whole. I mean, that's a field that still feels pretty futuristic to a lot of people. But this document from TKMOS, it's suggesting that, maybe the future is closer than we think.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I mean, manipulating stuff at the atomic and molecular level, that's like straight out science fiction. But then to see nanotechnology listed as like a specific competency that future medical biochemists in Turkey need to have, that's pretty wild.
It is. And I think it says a lot about how forward-thinking this training program is. They're really trying to prepare these specialists for a future where Well, where nanotechnology could completely change the game in terms of like everything from how we diagnose diseases to how we treat them.
Okay, so help me wrap my head around this. Like, what would that actually look like? What kind of impact could nanotechnology really have on the day-to-day work of a medical biochemist?
Well, imagine, for example, using nanoparticles to deliver drugs directly to specific cells or tissues in the body.
Mm.
It'd be like a microscopic guided missile, zeroing in on its target and delivering its payload with pinpoint accuracy. And that means you could minimize side effects A and D, maximize the effectiveness of the treatment. We're talking truly personalized therapy.
Wow, that's amazing. What about diagnosis? Could nanotechnology help us detect diseases earlier, before they really take hold?
Oh, absolutely. Think about nanosensors that could detect like tiny, tiny amounts of biomarkers for different diseases long before our current methods could even pick them up. That would be a total game changer for early diagnosis and treatment. I mean, potentially we could be saving countless lives.
So it would be like having like a little microscopic detective inside the body, constantly on the lookout for clues and sending us alerts if something seems off, even before we start feeling sick.
That's a great way to put it. And this 2COM-OS document, by including nanotechnology as a competency, it's basically saying, hey, this is the future of medicine, and we need to make sure our graduates are ready for it.
And on that note of preparing for the future, I mean, another thing that really stood out to me in this document was the emphasis on research. It's woven throughout the entire training program,
Yeah.
from that early thesis selection we talked about to actively participating in research projects. It's like they're instilling a researcher's mindset from day one.
Right, which makes sense when you think about it. Medical biochemistry, it's a field that thrives on new discoveries.
Mm.
Like every day, there are breakthroughs happening, pushing the boundaries of what we know and what we can do. So, to stay at the forefront of all that, you need specialists who are not just good at applying what we already know,
Yeah.
but who are also capable of pushing those boundaries even further through their own research.
So it's not just about learning the textbook stuff. It's about being able to ask new questions, challenge the old assumptions, and constantly look for ways to expand our understanding.
Yeah. Exactly. And the training program seems to really encourage that inquisitive spirit. They have students giving scientific presentations, participating in journal clubs where they critique research articles, and they even have opportunities to present their own findings at conferences.
So they're really equipping these trainees to be leaders in the field, not just in the lab, but like in the wider world of medical biochemistry, right?
Exactly. And that leadership, it goes beyond the research lab, too. Remember those basic competencies we talked about earlier, like communication, teamwork, being able to manage people and projects? Well, those skills are also crucial for leading research teams, collaborating with other healthcare professionals, and ultimately for making real progress when it comes to patient care.
It's impressive how much emphasis they put on those broader skills. It's like they're saying, yeah, being brilliant in the lab is important, but it's not enough. You got to be able to translate that brilliance into something that makes a real difference in the world. And for that, you need a whole other set of skills.
It really does reflect, a more holistic approach to what it means to be a medical professional in this day and age.
There's this section in the document that I found kind of intriguing, and it talks about the pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical phases of laboratory testing. It's a lot of analyticals, but
Oh yeah, those are really important concepts. They basically highlight the fact that getting accurate, reliable results from a lab test, it's not just about running the test itself. It's about carefully managing every single step of the process, from how you collect and handle the sample, to how you actually perform the test, to how you interpret and report the results. It's like a chain, and every link has to be strong.
so being a skilled medical biochemist, it's not just about knowing how to run the machines. It's about understanding the whole ecosystem of lab testing and making sure that every step is done right.
Right. And this training program really emphasizes that sense of responsibility for quality from start to finish. They want these specialists to be like guardians of the data, making sure the information coming out of the lab is reliable and trustworthy.
Okay, so can you give me an example? Like what could potentially go wrong in one of these phases and how would a well-trained medical biochemist catch it?
Sure. Let's say you have a blood sample that wasn't handled properly before it even got to the lab.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe it wasn't stored at the right temperature, or maybe there was a delay in getting it to the lab. Well, a skilled medical biochemist would be able to look at that sample and say, something's not quite right here. They might even recommend recollecting the sample just to be safe, to make absolutely sure that the results are accurate.
So they're like quality control experts, making sure that the information coming out of the lab is the real deal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, in that post-analytical phase, they're also the ones who are responsible for interpreting those results.
Yeah.
And not just in isolation, but like taking into account the patient's entire medical history, what medications they're on, all sorts of other factors. They're the ones who connect the dots and help the doctor make the right call when it comes to diagnosis and treatment.
It's funny because as we're talking about all this, I'm realizing that, for most patients, the role of the medical biochemist is kind of invisible, right? They're not the ones we see in the exam room, but the work they do behind the scenes is absolutely essential.
That's such a good point. It's easy to overlook their expertise because it's not always front and center.
Hmm.
But they're like, well, like we were saying earlier, they're like detectives. They're carefully analyzing all these clues hidden within our, blood, urine, tissue samples, all that stuff to try and solve the mystery of what's going on inside our bodies. They're kind of the unsung heroes of healthcare, working tirelessly to make sure we get the right diagnosis and the right treatment.
And this document from TKMS, by outlining such a comprehensive training program, it's basically ensuring that Turkey is going to have a new generation of these skilled detectives ready to tackle the challenges of 21st century medicine.
It's a really impressive model, that's for sure. And it makes you wonder how other countries are approaching this.
Yeah.
Like, are there similar training programs in other parts of the world? What are some of the key differences?
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear about that too. Maybe we can explore that in the next part of our deep dive. I have a feeling there might be some surprising similarities and differences.
Definitely. There's a whole world of medical biochemistry training out there to explore. And, well, I can't wait to dig in.
Sounds good to me. So folks, stick around. We'll be right back after a quick break. Okay, so we're back, and we've been taking this deep dive into medical biochemistry training, focusing on this really in-depth curriculum from Turkey. But, it's got me thinking about, how do other countries stack up? Like, what's their approach to training these specialists?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because even though the core principles of medical biochemistry are pretty much universal, the way training programs are structured, well, that could vary quite a bit from one country to the next. Depends on their healthcare system and all that.
Right. So, like, what are some of the biggest differences you've seen? Like, if we compare how medical biochemists are trained, say, in Europe or North America, to what we've been looking at in this Turkish model.
Well, one thing that jumps out right away is the length of training. In some European countries, it takes longer to become, a fully certified medical biochemist.
Yeah.
They often have a more extensive period of specialization.
That makes sense. Especially if they're like really emphasizing those elements of lab management and quality assurance that we talked about earlier, right?
Exactly. Some European healthcare systems are very, very focused on that stuff. So naturally, their training programs reflect that. They want their specialists to be ready to step into leadership roles, make sure
Mhm.
those labs are running smoothly.
So it's not just about the science itself, it's also about giving them the practical skills they need to navigate the ins and outs of their specific healthcare system.
Exactly. And then if you look at North America, well, there's often a much stronger emphasis on research. A lot of their training programs require a dedicated research component, and sometimes that even involves like a formal thesis defense, which, I mean, makes sense because North America has a very strong research culture in medicine.
So it's like each region kind of tailors its training to its own strengths and priorities, right? But ultimately, they all have the same goal: train highly competent professionals who can bridge that gap between the lab and the clinic.
Absolutely. Doesn't matter if you're in Turkey or Europe or North America or anywhere else. The goal of medical biochemistry training is always the same. Give specialists the tools they need to apply scientific principles to real-world problems in healthcare.
And like we were talking about earlier, the field itself is constantly evolving. New discoveries in genetics, personalized medicine, all these emerging technologies like nanotechnology, it's really pushing the boundaries of what's possible,
It
right?
is. It really is. Which is why lifelong learning is absolutely crucial for medical biochemists.
Yeah.
They've got to be adaptable, always looking to learn new things, expand their skill set to keep pace with all the advancements.
And this Turkish document we've been going through, it seems to really get that. There's that strong focus on independent learning, on staying ahead of the curve. It's really encouraging to see.
It is. And it makes you wonder, what does the future hold for medical biochemistry training on a global scale? Will we see more more standardization across different countries, or will each country's program just keep adapting to its own unique situation?
That's a good question. It's hard to say, but I think we might end up seeing a mix of both. Like maybe the core principles will become more aligned internationally, but there'll still be some regional variations, to account for different healthcare needs and priorities.
Yeah, I think that's a very likely scenario. And who knows what kinds of cool innovations we'll see incorporated into training programs in the future. I mean, we might start seeing virtual reality simulations to give students more hands-on experience, or maybe artificial intelligence helping with data analysis, or even personalized learning pathways that are tailored to each student's strengths and interests.
Yeah, the possibilities are really exciting. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of medical biochemistry training, I gotta say it's been a really eye-opening experience. We've learned so much about the complexity of this field, how rigorous the training is, and just how crucial these specialists are to modern healthcare.
I totally agree. And I hope our listeners have gotten a new appreciation for this fascinating world, too.
Hmm.
It might be a behind-the-scenes field, but it touches all our lives in really profound ways.
And who knows, maybe some of our listeners will be inspired to join the ranks,
It's a die.
become one of these amazing specialists themselves.
It's definitely a challenging path, but incredibly rewarding. So if you're out there and you're intrigued by what you've heard today, don't hesitate to dig a little deeper. There's
Mhm.
so much information out there. The world of medical biochemistry is always open to curious minds.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. And until next time, remember, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world around us.